Are we recording? Is this thing on?
Yes, it is. Welcome to RevOps 500, where we invite the world's top marketers to answer the tough questions facing growing organizations.
Ooh, sounds important.
I'm Sajeel Qureshi.
And I'm Gil Bates. Join us as we dive deep into the world of RevOps.
We'll be learning strategies and expertise from first-hand experience. RevOps 500 is sponsored by Computan. They provide technical and development expertise to growth-focused marketing.
Let's get started.
Hey everybody, Sajeel Qureshi here, and welcome to another episode of RevOps 500, where we interview some of the smartest and most intelligent RevOps gurus there are in the market today. Today I am excited to be talking to another one. He is highly skilled in technical SEO and marketing automation and those sorts of things. He's dedicated his entire career basically to designing and executing major initiatives that have consistently outperformed target goals. He's a great guy. He gives back. He's committed to empowering future industry leaders through engaging training, coaching, mentoring, and professional development opportunities. Right now, he's the Senior Director of Demand Generation and Marketing Operations at Crux. Nick Talbert, welcome to RevOps 500.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so let's just jump right into it. So, Nick, in your view, what is one RevOps myth that you can think of?
Well, I mean, let's just start with the term RevOps. It doesn't necessarily have a set function in most companies. It's sort of a concept as a whole. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of buzz around, I mean, just like the RevOps function in general. But, I think the myth is that it's actually it represents a set of deliverables, and it doesn't ever really represent the set of deliverables. It's more of like, hey, like your constant task is to remove the friction to bringing in more revenue, whatever that friction may be. Sometimes that's upper funnel friction. Sometimes that's way lower funnel friction. It's basically where anything's getting stalled out and it doesn't have the ability to sort of move forward, regardless of where that is in your life cycle.
So that's a really, interesting point, that there's really no job description or set of requirements which is fixed. It's more about reducing friction wherever there might be when it comes to driving revenue. So let's say, for example, if it's a hotel, that could be like you can't book it online. You can only book it in person. Well, that's friction that needs to be removed, and that's obviously going to be different than if it's the public library or in Walmart or something like that. But you're saying RevOps' job is primarily to reduce that friction. So how do you find out where that friction is really? I mean, is there some questions you ask? What do you do typically?
No, I mean, like you really need, I mean, to be effective, you really need to measure the entire life cycle. So you need to understand exactly, when somebody becomes interested in your product or service, whatever you're selling, they're going to do a number of different actions, before they get to your website, when they're on your website, when they're doing research, when they're, trying to purchase or transact, and all of those steps sort of require, nudges along the way in order to, help them pick the right behaviors in order to lead them to the product that you're trying to get them to buy. And I think that if you're not measuring all those steps in a pretty logical sequence of some sort, it doesn't necessarily have to be linear sequence, but it's a sequence nonetheless. I think then you can easily see, oh wow, like to get them to go from knowing about us to wanting to learn more about us, it takes them 3 months to do that on average. Every single customer that we've ever gotten in. Why does it take them so long to learn about our product? Do we not have enough information up on the website? Do we not have the right information? Like, what's missing from the overall thing to help this process go smoother?
So now does that mean every sort of product and service needs to be e-commerce in a way? Or I mean, are you something like that? Or?
Not necessarily e-commerce, but it does need to have a digital footprint. That's the easiest way to measure it. I mean, so you can like the Crux, the company I work for now, we are far from an e-commerce company. You can't actually transact yet to get an account provisioned just by simply clicking around on the website. However, there is a process of finding out who we are, learning about who we are, requesting to talk to sales,
Sure.
moving forward, and then the sales has a process to move them through of like, hey, are they technically qualified? Do they have the right budget? All of those types of things. But all of those have, distinct actions that need to be measured. So whether it's you're measuring how many meetings got set off of a particular piece, or if you're measuring how many downloads, how many clicks, how many opens, how many, all of that stuff has both a number associated with it, like it ticks, up, ticks the counter over one, and it also has a date stamp. So if you're date stamping your entire life cycle, you can very easily go through and say, okay, well, all of these tasks over here there seem to be moving really, really quickly through these, but then they get hung up on, like, a big one for sales hang up is getting contracts approved.
Yeah.
And going through the red lines on legal. Like, I mean, in reality, from a operations, that's a big step that we don't look to optimize often. And so, like, if that's the problem, I'm going to go sit down with the legal counsel and be like, okay, how can we speed this up? Can we have templates? Can we have, easier writers that we can sort of cut and remove? Like, how do we make this less of a burdensome process so that people can sort of swim through this a lot faster without getting hung up? Because those stalls in the process, time kills all deals, essentially, at the end of the day. And the more time you allow something, you're basically strangling the opportunity that you have in front of you.
That is a really interesting way of working at it. So as a RevOps person, you could still be involved in contract law and language with legal if it's creating friction in your
Correct.
buying process. And that is a very unique and interesting perspective. That's a really hot take that you've shared with us. So Nick, I appreciate that. Yeah, like that's so. Let's kind of keep going with that vibe a little bit. So now you probably at Crux you got a revenue process, obviously. I mean,
Sure.
What keeps where's the friction in your process now? Like, what keeps you up at night technically? Is there some sort of something in your technology that keeps you up? How do you
I mean, Crux is it's a niche topic on an already established category.
Yeah.
So it makes it difficult because if you just look at us, as a whole and try to put us in a bucket, we easily can fit in with all the other data integration providers. I mean, if you're trying to connect, system A to system B, and it needs to go through a transformation layer in order to get there, like, there's a lot of providers who do that. But what it really comes down to is like, which sets of data are you actually trying to connect to each other? If you're trying to just go from your Salesforce instance to Zendesk or vice versa, like there's a lot of companies that sort of handle those kind of things, and that's not really where we want to play. So any traffic coming to us that wants to do that kind of thing is not like we're just going to say, yeah, thanks, but no thanks.
Sure.
On the other hand, if they're coming to us wanting to have very distinct external data pieces that usually, I mean, for the most part, finance teams use them a lot for hedging information. So if you've got a pretty big stake in a retail organization like let's say like Home Depot, and you want to be able to have data to understand exactly how can I predict Home Depot's sales for the upcoming year, you can go and buy data that has a location of every Home Depot in the US and how full their parking lot is on a daily basis, or how full their parking lot is on a Sunday basis. And like that will tell you like how many people are coming in the door, which basically you can correlate a bunch of things that after that about like how that's going to either reduce your overall value of the interest you have in Home Depot, or increase it depending on what your outcome. But imagine that data for pretty much any investment that you're going to have. that's what Crux manages. And there's very few providers that actually have an established connection with all of those data providers. So what makes it difficult for us is that, you know, specifying what we do and like the connections that we make is highly valuable to a certain group of people, but that certain group of people is not very big. The market size is big just because the amount of data each one of those people have to bring on is substantial. And so you have to go in, and so like you can't do typical like demand gen or even prospecting channels. You've really got to be targeted and go through and like pinpoint a function to say, to be before you even talk to somebody and be able to like predict out, yes, this person based off of their firmographics, demographics, preferences and interests are more likely going to be a higher value reach out than, the half of people over here.
So is that like a lead scoring thing that you struggle with, or
it's not really lead scoring. It's basically trying, like, there's no, like if you're trying to, let's take another technology vendor. If you're trying to find a CRM system, you can go to 100 different places on the web and read about all the different CRM places. And because CRM is a well understood and well tread category. And while there's variations of CRM, they all basically are doing the same thing if they're keeping your sort of customers and accounts, correlated to each other.
Yep.
Data integration, on the other hand, basically, there is a whole bunch of different types of data. There's infinite amounts of data that you can integrate. And the types of data that you're trying to integrate and the destinations where you want them to integrate to make a big difference on which provider that you're going to use. But that's not common knowledge to anybody else unless they've tried to actually build a pipeline off of, if you're a data engineer and you're trying to build a pipeline off of some random data source that has a API that was created in 10 years ago.
Sure.
Like you're going to have a lot of trouble doing it, and it's going to take you waste a lot of time. And you're in a category with like hedge funds and finance folks that when they need data, like they needed it yesterday. And you're telling them, no, it's going to take me 2 months to go through and, cipher through all these get calls to understand exactly what's going on with this. No, it's not going to work.
No.
So the problem becomes like, how do you find that one person that's clearly having a problem when they're not really throwing up any active signals that they're having a problem because they're so focused on just trying to get it done.
Okay, got it. So the finding of the right person.
Yeah, there's no G2 category for what we're doing. Yeah. There's no easy, there's no journalists that cover specifically what we're doing. And so we get thrown into categories where we spend most of our time telling them how we're not that instead of actually talking about what we do.
What you do. Oh,
right.
Interesting. So it's almost like a value prop and finding the right people. That's what's keeping you up in it. So how do you solve a problem like that? What do you do?
Well, like most things, I really revert to, okay, so we have a set of clients and we know a set of prospects that are interested, and we know what that profile looks like. Let's take that profile of firmographic detail and take that profile back of their, work demographics, combine those two together and find out what are the salient points that live across all of those, pieces. So it may be a particular company size. It may be, whatever's driving them to sort of do that need. Like, are they a growth oriented? Are they equity, fixed income? Is the strategy driving the need for data? Is the whatever the leading indicator that's driving their need, you go and look for that aspect.
Got it.
And you try to find a leading indicator in the marketplace that is basically an early sign that they're having this problem.
Got it.
So one of the things we do is we go and scrape all of the troubleshooting guidelines that are like online help for a bunch of the data providers that we serve, and we basically we pull out common terms out of that scraped data and then use those as keywords for people like when they're going out and searching. So if you're trying to hook up Morningstar data and going into like an AWS, there's a certain set of common errors that people make when they're trying to make that connection.
Sure.
If you market what those common errors are, you're immediately going to people by anybody knowing and seeing what you're talking about and saying, hey, I know what that is. You're creating this sort of message strategy that sort of is an automatic hand raiser of like, oh yeah, like if you're going to respond to that and you know what I'm talking about, then you have that problem.
Yep. Got it. Okay. So that's how you do it. So it's kind of like a very targeted, content marketing strategy with technical
Marketing,
details.
and then we're pinging that off constantly off of how can we, what I typically do internally is build a knowledge graph that sits around your ICP.
Okay.
And it's basically how many times can I understand exactly what they're doing, whether it's on our owned properties, domain or subdomains, etc., how they're responding to our email messages, what kind of conferences are these people going to, all of that stuff. So we pile that into a big compiler. We go scrape all of those websites that we can find that have any information on that, and then we pull back in, and then we basically do a pretty large a linguistics analysis, basically, where it's almost like you're building a large language model, but only the network is specific to your ICPs, and you're trying to figure out what's the language that they're speaking on a regular basis. And so you're making it so that you can predict what's the thing that's going to sort of like pull them in based off of the data that you bring in and based off of what their job title or interests are. And you're just marrying those up constantly. But in order to do that, you've got to track and pull in data from a lot of different places, because on one account you may only have a domain that you're trying to pull from, but that this domain often gets visited by, I don't know, these lists of IP addresses over here, and these IP addresses, you can do a reverse lookup on that, correspond to these companies. And so in order to connect the dots to all of those pieces, you need to have multiple connection points to be able to come in and feed that data into your CRM. So you need enrichment data, you need behavior data, you need all of those things to be able to combine in there. And now you can once you start pulling that data in from various places and sorting it and making sure it's categorized correctly, now you can the puzzle starts to become more put together. And it may not be a perfect puzzle 100% put together, but it's a good enough to where you can say, okay, these are the people we should be talking to, here's the conferences they go to, here's the emails that they're going to respond to. And then you put that together, and then their response to that becomes yet another set of data that you can optimize to.
Absolutely. And how do you see the future? Like, I mean, what you were describing is kind of like the past and even the present of RevOps. How do you see the future? How do you see the future going? What is your view on that?
I mean, the future is going to be, how can you create a data set that is custom to your product line, and that you can then, I mean, it's what the future's always been. It's just sort of more personalized messages, more, it's communication at the right time. It's and fixing what they're missing in order to make a decision. Your audience is missing something. They don't know all the information, and you're trying to figure out exactly, okay, if you had point 1, point 2, point 3, and point 4 together, this is easily a logical thing that you should be choosing our product. Okay, which of those 4 points are you missing because you're not able to easily make that decision?
Got it.
And I think a lot more of RevOps is going to be sort of sussing out that connection and then feeding that back into your sales team and saying, like, okay, this guy, the more communication I have with my sales team, I can sit there and say, this guy came in from this, here's his profile, here's his interests, or her interests. This is where you're going to interject them. Here's where you should start the conversation. Is you're doing a lot of that groundwork and that legwork so that when they do talk to somebody from your company, it should feel like you've talked to them 6 times before already, because you know so much more about them. And you can go in and be like, hey, I know you're having problems with, getting Moody's credit rating data into this. Like, let's talk about what are your struggles there. And it gets right to the point.
Mm-hmm.
Sales presentations in general, like, if I'm buying new technology, if I'm buying something new and I have to go through a salesperson, drives me bonkers. Because every salesperson has got like this set pitch that they're going through
Right.
that has worked for 70% of the people that they go through, but they are hitting all of the points. You go through the first slide, which is the introduction slide, then you go through the second one, which is the sort of like, why are we here slide, or like the history of our company, and then like basically all this stuff that you do not need to know
Right.
in order to buy their product, but they feel like they need to give some credibility into your getting there. I want the credibility not to be on the story of the company and the like where we came from and like what our aim to be is like how well can we solve the problem you're having right now.
Can you do both online? You don't think, or is it really just one or the other?
I mean, I think, my sales team would probably, throw me out the window for saying this, but like, I think there's going to be an increasingly, as customers just get more savvy, the savvier your audience, the less they need sales people to handhold them through the process.
Right.
If you have a download and a wizard basically that can guide you through the first couple steps of getting set up into a software, like that eliminates a whole bunch of process, and you can do the selling in a much more modular fashion, and you can say, it's just like you're just getting more pinpoint with like where the problem is, and like that, like I said, what's that piece of information that you're missing that would allow you to make a decision now?
Got it. And what do you feel like, say if you're a services company or something like that, I mean, do you feel like having pricing or a purchasing process that doesn't involve salespeople? So are you one of those people who says, like, when all things are possible, try to eliminate a salesperson needing to talk to somebody to do a deal?
I'd say try to eliminate friction, whatever it is.
Whatever it is. Okay.
So if the friction is the salespeople can't meet with them until next week because they've already got a full schedule this week, that's friction.
Okay.
The salesperson has a territory, and technically this one sits in their territory, but they're also in a territory that's seeming like got a lot of busy right now. So now they can't make for 2 more weeks. That's friction. So, I mean, whatever it is, like, you should be able to move as fast as you want to as a customer or a potential customer and through the onboarding process. And that's just simply not how it is right now. You've got to go through checkpoints before you can get your hands on something and start playing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very difficult thing. I know a lot of times we see, tech companies, they're stuck. They don't know whether they should put pricing on the online or not. And if it's obviously you can't buy it if it's not online. So sometimes they talk to sales to do anything. It's like, well, talk to sales. That's friction, like you're saying.
It's the default to go through and say, okay, we'll talk to salesperson. Now their job is to go through and define exactly like how we want to price this.
Yeah.
When in reality, if you really look at your business right now and you're realistic with it, there is a pricing guideline. There is a understanding that applies to probably 70% of your customers.
Sure.
And if that's true, then put that up on the website. Let people figure that out, understand what what the sort of units of cost are that are associated with your company.
Yeah.
And give them a calculator to sort of figure out what they're wanting to do. Like, give them, like, empower your customer in order to find that information without having to talk to somebody at your company, because every single time you involve a human in that interaction, it slows down the process.
Interesting. All right, let's just kind of switch gears a little bit now.
Sure.
Like, take me. Let's talk about you a bit. Nick. I mean, like, when did you get started in this? I mean, did you always know you wanted to be like a marketing leader, a RevOps leader? I mean, how did you get here exactly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm guessing that most RevOps people, they didn't start out wanting to be RevOps people. They
Sure.
just sort of either got to a point where they were so frustrated with something else that they were like, okay, I just want to dig into this to see why is this a problem?
Yeah.
Which is kind of how I got here. But I mean, let's put it this way. I've always been interested in marketing. I've always been interested in the idea that, you know, that somebody, is out there that your product, whatever it is, has a problem that they can solve, or, whether that's, the problem is I'm not entertained enough, or the problem is I'm having some complex business problem.
Sure.
There's a solution out there, but the thing that's missing between you who is selling that product and the person who wants to buy that product is communication and information. And so I've always been able to sort of like tackle this, because I mean, I love marketing, but I hate advertising.
Mm,
I mean, I've been in advertising. I worked at ad agencies for years. And in the majority of what I would try to do at those places is say, okay, you're spending all of this money on all of these sort of extra things over here, and you have no idea what that's doing for your brand, but it's just assumed that you have to sort of spend that money in order to get that place,
sure.
which
Sure.
it may be true. But what you don't know is exactly like what am I missing in the process?
Yep.
Like, why can't these people just find me if they have that problem?
Yep.
And I think if you thought through that process, there's enough places where you can intersect them in a day that has good timing and is relevant to what they're doing at that particular moment, and that's where you want to catch them. So thinking better about that instead of, I mean, again, consumer products and B2B products kind of have a different philosophy here, and they should. But for B2B products, if you're actually solving a business problem, go to where people are having that problem. Like,
Mm,
there's plenty of information out there to have you figure out exactly what's the cadence of messages that we need to be able to inform you about that is going to allow you to make that decision faster. And I mean, my background is I started out in agencies. I somehow jumped the fence and went into ad tech after I was at
mhm.
an agency because I was sort of, the ad tech's client, and they brought me on board.
Got
And
it.
then I ran the product marketing team for a global competitive, the second competitor to DoubleClick back in the day.
Got it.
And I mean, there is where I learned a lot about just sort of like marketing data in general, just because, when you're in the middle of those campaigns, you get to see exactly how the structure of data and how they're able to record that data, and where the lineage is on that particular data makes a huge difference on what
Huge
you can
difference.
report on the outset. You know, it's this was back when you had to have like on-prem Greenplum servers and
Yeah.
and Microsoft servers that were like $4 million a piece in order to sort of like have a website. But nowadays with the cloud, it's even easier in some cases for you to find out what those digital pieces are, because everything leaves like a digital breadcrumb trail, and you just need to build a machine that can pick up on those breadcrumbs and then and deliver a message to where that breadcrumb was left and say, anybody else who's having this particular problem,
Mhm.
here's where you can call and let me know,
Got it.
or here's where you can download the product that's going to solve you.
Got it. Got it. All right. So now let's talk about a little bit more about you again. So
Sure.
if you go back 15 years, 20 years, it's the old question. If you're back in your in a college class, what would you tell yourself in the past that you know now? What advice would you give yourself?
Oh, I mean, I would 100% tell myself to go and study root-based market economics a lot more.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Um, everything in the digital world is a correlation of a market that has a supply side and a demand side. And if you can figure out what are the characteristics and the makeup of that particular market and be able to map that out, you're going to have a much easier time visualizing the process that people need to go through in order to make a connection within those marketplaces.
Wow.
I think, I mean, I've gone back and gotten like professional degrees in behavioral economics. I've got, a couple of things that I've got done personally since then.
Mm-hmm.
But, me as a 23-year-old
Yeah.
20 years ago
Uh-huh.
was, I mean, like, I didn't realize how much I would be using somewhat complex economic math in order to dictate how well we're going to be able to pull in an audience.
That's interesting. What kind of economic math do you use? So I could chat.
I mean, I mean, probabilities is literally I mean, like, I live, eat, and breathe it every single day because I'm actually trying to understand what I'm never going to know 100% for certain that something's going to happen.
Sure.
So all I'm left with is a scale of probabilities. And what you always want to do is choose your best probabilistic match to what you're doing it's most likely to give you the outcome that you want.
Got it.
And layering all of those probabilities together to basically add up to an index of probabilities is essentially what graph theory is sort of like based off of. And then graph theory gets into a whole bunch of just sort of like velocity and vectoring and and how you move that in that particular market. And then you can understand exactly like what are the big forces that make moves in this market. And it's, like, looking at it that way, I've been able to go through and be like, we shouldn't really be advertising to these people over here. They are our customers,
right?
But like the influence is actually coming from that thing over there. And we should go set up camp right at that spot over there. And it will just, if we sell into there, we're just going to ride that wave down into the customer.
Got it. And what about outside of work? I mean, I think when we talked before, you mentioned you're a family guy. You're outside a lot. I mean, what can you tell us what you do outside of work?
Well, I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, so much of my outside of the work basically revolves around a lot of basically trying not to do things that are Paw Patrol. So, I mean, like, there's a nice push and pull there between them and us, and most of the time they win. And so there's a lot of my time's taking that. But like, when I do have time to myself, I love, I love taking calculated risks in my play, whether that be rock climbing, mountain biking, whatever it is. There's always a calculated risk that you're trying to achieve, and then what that calculated risk and the potential outcome on that's how you should be deciding what goes in your day, not necessarily what you want to do or whatever it is. It's just sort of every action that you take throughout the day has some risk associated with it. A lot of times it's not intuitive of what that is. There's so many things along the field of economics that basically, if you can actually properly measure a model for something, the outcome is actually going, oh, well, it's obvious that it's that, but on the inset, I would have never picked that. I would have never done that 100%. I mean, you take things like that and you can just debunk a whole bunch of existing, best practices that are not going to be a best practice for you, and you're going to waste a whole lot of time doing it.
So have you ever miscalculated on a bike or?
Oh yeah, no, I've got. If I could show you my leg right now, there is like my shins look like somebody took a various knife and poke through the things just because it's got scars and everything else from just mountain biking wrecks or whatever it is. I mean, you have gear on, you're never going to break anything, but you do get a flesh wound here and there. Yeah,
so I mean, that's part of the process, right? Is trial and error, the probabilities, and
calculated risk.
I like that. That's a good one. So Nick, where can people find you? I mean, is there a place where people can go to learn more about you?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, my LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn. It's just LinkedIn, Nick Talbert. You can find me there. Yeah, or if you wanted to, or my email address here at Crux is nick.talbert@cruxdata.com. I'm happy to answer questions, and then also I involved in several operations groups, MOPS groups and RevOps groups in general, like RevOps 500. There's a lot of those groups out there that basically you can get a lot of good advice from, and I'm there as well.
Got it. Well, I mean, this was really amazing, Nick. I mean, we talked a lot about, like just how RevOps is different for different businesses, different shapes and sizes. We've talked, I mean, something that we never really talked about before on the show. We talked about, like how RevOps is really a function of reducing friction to revenue. We learned a whole lot, today. So I just really appreciate you for taking the time to come out and show us how it's done a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. I am an infinite geek about this sort of stuff. So I'm actually in the process running like a sync right now, and I can't wait for it to get done, because then I can go play with some more data.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going. You're always going. I mean, so look, anyways, I mean, if to anyone listening out there, if you learned something today or had a good time listening to guests like Nick or our other ones, please, just tell someone else about the show. Again, Nick Talbert, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, same to you.
Yeah, and this has been another exciting episode of RevOps 500, and we'll see you guys all next time.
And that wraps up another episode of RevOps 500. Thanks for joining. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at RevOps500.com. RevOps 500 is sponsored by CompuTech, providing technical and development expertise to growth-focused marketing.